Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Why Use Points to Estimate webinar. If you have come along to one of our webinars before, welcome back. And if this is your first webinar with us, thank you for joining us. I'm Chloe, I'm Reinteractive's Community Manager, and today James McGrath, our Development Manager, will be running our webinar, and Mikel Lindsaar is also available. He'll be jumping in every now and then to share some examples as well. So James, if you're ready, let's get started.
I am ready. So, quick introductions. Reinteractive, we build online tools that ensure your success. And we do that mostly in Ruby on Rails and Ember.js. So we're a software development house that help other people build their software. I'm James McGrath, I'm Development Manager, and I help manage all of our software projects from start to finish. And I really enjoy getting software shipped and making sure projects are running smoothly. With us is also Mikel Lindsaar, who's the founder of Reinteractive. He's a Rails core contributor, and maybe you'd like to say hello, Mikel.
G'day, everybody. Thanks for coming along. We'll be diving through this, and hopefully you get something out of it, and James will be leading the way, and I'll chirp in at probably inappropriate moments and interrupt his flow to give some anecdotes every now and then. But we'll see what happens.
Excellent. Okay, so you also heard from Chloe Fisher, who is our community manager. Chloe organises our community events like InstallFest and Development Hub, and she's been instrumental in organising these webinar series. So thank you for all your help, Chloe. The format for today is we're going to present for about 30 minutes, and we'll take questions at the end. We can also do questions during the presentation. So if you've got questions, just type them into the webinar chat window or in the questions area, and we can address them as they come up. I'm going to be doing most of the talking, but as Mikel said, he'll chirp in and interrupt me when he thinks it's really inappropriate. So, last webinar we talked about estimating of software projects and how we do that estimating. We talked about how estimates are often wrong in software projects and the issues that can cause those estimates to be wrong. We also talked about how we do things at Reinteractive, how when we start a software project, we will have a look at the feature set that we're going to be developing, and we will break those features down into smaller chunks or stories, and then we estimate those feature stories in points. Now, this points concept is quite an important concept, so we thought it deserved an entire webinar of its own, and so that's what we're going to talk about today. So, before we talk about why points are an important concept, let's talk about what points are. So, points are an abstract way to represent effort. At the start of every project, one of the first things we're going to do is to define a point scale. And you can see on this slide a good example of a point scale that we use. So we can say 1 point is the equivalent of 2 hours of effort, 2 points is worth half a day work, and it goes up to 8 points. And what we do is we use those points in estimates. And I will point out that it's really important. If we ever find ourselves estimating something with an 8 point of effort, we really don't want to use those 8 points because it's too large a task to estimate effectively. So we're going to break those things down. So points are a way to abstract out effort. They represent time. But why would we use points instead of a more familiar time unit? So an example, we might use hours or days. Why don't we do that instead of using these points against tasks? And that's what we're going to talk about today, because it is quite an important concept that we use during our project planning and management. So as I mentioned, at Reinteractive, we take features, and features, a couple examples here, menu bars or forms, or a whole notification system, and we then break those features down and assign points to them. So in this example, we're saying the menu bar, we're going to say it's going to take under 2 hours to produce. So we're going to give it 2 points. A form is sort of a whole day of work because it's got a bit of complexity. So we're going to assign it 4 points. Notification system, that's too big a block to just have as a single feature story. So we're going to break it down into a number of different stories, and here we're breaking it down into the ability to mark all the notifications red, listing all the notifications, filtering the notifications, and we assign different points to those features. And when we're doing that estimation process, what we're doing is we're imagining implementing that software in our minds and the steps that it takes to implement it, and we think about how long it's going to take to do those things, and we base that on past experience or similar. If we've got a good understanding of the feature, we can work it through in our minds, and then we apply those points based on that scale that we discussed before. So to understand why points are useful, though, we need to define another term, that is velocity. So velocity is the average speed at which the points are delivered by a project team over a time period, and we typically take our velocity on a weekly basis. And so when we're starting out a project, we don't have any past experience with it, what we're going to deliver. So we base we come up with an expected velocity. And an example of this might be if we've got 2 developers and each are working 4 days a week, and our point scale is saying 4 points a day of delivered features, that works out to an expected 32 points of velocity. So that's how we start off the project. It's not, the 32 points expected velocity is not based on any past experiences though, so it's just as useful as a guide. It's what we're expecting to happen, but it's by no means is a certainty. Where velocity becomes really useful is as we get the project underway and we start getting that data of how many points we're actually delivering. So once we're underway, we can calculate the velocity from project history. We typically take the velocity of the past 2 to 3 weeks, so we can base our velocity calculations on the average number of points delivered over the past recent weeks. For example, we might have delivered 20 points one week, 15 another, and 19 another the third week. And then if we take the average, it's 18 points over that 3-week period. The reason we take the average over that number of weeks is that we don't want to get fooled by outliers. When we're talking about whether or not a point has been delivered, we only count the point after the client has marked the story as accepted. The feature has been gone through acceptance testing with the client, and sometimes they will do that early, sometimes they'll be late doing that. And by taking the average over the 3 weeks, it means that we can smooth out those bumps that are caused by certain things. We also don't take the average over the entire history of the project, and that's important because velocity does change over time. For example, at the start of a project, it's going to be a lot slower, and we're going to be delivering less velocity at the start, whilst the developers are getting their heads around the business model, coming to terms with the different concepts in the system, finding the rhythm amongst the team, and those sort of things. We'll find that the project starts off slow at a lower velocity and it grows over time. And so that's by taking just the past 3 weeks of velocity, it helps us to get a more accurate idea of the speed we're delivering points. Okay, so to really appreciate how points and velocity are useful concepts, we need to first recognize something about the way we use estimates. Estimates are not, we're not quoting when we're doing estimates, we're estimating how long something's going to take. It may take less time, it may take more time. But what we're not doing is we're not committing on what is going to be delivered. So we don't say, oh, we've got an average velocity of 35 points a week, and therefore we know we're going to deliver 70 points of features over the next 2 weeks. So points are not a tool to ensure developers are going to deliver a set amount of features each week. if you've put a low number of points on a feature, it doesn't mean it's going to get delivered any quicker than if we had to put a high number of points on it. And I mean, if I ever see a developer who takes a whole day to deliver something that we've estimated at 1 point of effort, it's very rarely because the developer is not doing their job, not being productive. It's usually because it's a bad estimate, because estimates can be very difficult to do. Sometimes you miss some complexity that is not obvious before you start the feature, but they often crop up as we're doing going along in the project. And this idea of points not being a commitment to deliver, it really works both ways. We don't give a guarantee. The developer's not giving a guarantee that they're going to deliver a set number of points, but equally they're not going to stop work once they've reached that magic number of points either. So sometimes we'll deliver fewer points than we estimated, sometimes we'll deliver more, but generally the number of points that are delivered reflect the amount of effort we're putting in. So points and velocity are really, they're tools to help predict the future. It's all about planning. So what we can do, once we've got a good calculation of velocity based on past experiences, we can say, well, our average velocity over the last couple of weeks, say it was 35 points, we've got 100 points of features remaining in the backlog, so remaining features to be developed. At our current velocity, that's going to take us 3 weeks to complete all of those features. And that's really valuable information for planning. It helps us to look at whether or not we are going to make a deadline. Are we going to be able to finish the project before the looming deadline? Or do we have enough budget assigned? If we've got 3 weeks left of features to complete, but we've only got 2 weeks of budget, then we can have those discussions about, well, do we need to either increase the budget or decrease scope? Do we need to add new members to the team? It allows us to prioritize things correctly. If we know that we've got a very tight amount of time left, we can make sure that things are getting the proper attention is being put on prioritizing those stories. So it's a really important
And just on this
tool.
one.
Yep.
And just on this one, we quite often have clients that so there's a truth in software development, right? And that truth is that the required or wanted or needed or absolutely must have scope will always, always, always exceed the available budget. And it's not a case of people just can't estimate properly or software developers are slow or anything like that. It basically comes down to human nature, and we're always wanting a bit more or we want something a bit better. And software is a process. It's not, you don't necessarily go and buy a product. I mean, even people that go and buy, say, Word or the latest operating system or any off-the-shelf product that they buy, there's always something in that product that they wish that this system could do. Wouldn't it be great if it could just do blah, you know? And if that's happening for software projects that have hundreds of developers on them and get produced over years, then it's absolutely going to happen on a project that might take, 3 months to build in a website and get live. So you're always going to have more points or features being requested than your budget allows. And what this method does, being able to help predict the future, it allows us to say, well, let's not worry about these 2 or 3 features here. Let's push them to the bottom of the list. And this little polishing one, we're going to move that lower because it's more important that we get this payment page working, because we need to be able to accept money. And the most successful projects that we've ever run have been the ones where the client has been willing to do that and been willing to work with us to reduce and reprioritize those points as we move forward, and embraces the fact that they can get a lot of development done, but they've got to focus it on the features that really matter. Thanks, James.
Cool, no worries. Yeah, software it's one of those things that you can almost never finish. There's always one more thing to be done. And so prioritizing what features are to be done or the amount of polish you're going to put onto things is a very important part of the project, because you could spend forever just making something perfect, but that would be at the expense of actually delivering other pieces of the software. So one of the real the benefits of using points over a more familiar concept of like hours or days is that we are deliberately vague. The scale is not very fine-grained, and that's deliberate. Estimating the development of features down to the minute, it's going to require a lot of effort, and it's basically futile anyway, because it is impossible to provide, well, not impossible, but very difficult to provide unambiguous requirements. And the best place to put that unambiguity into the effort is better to be put into developing the feature rather than writing a document about describing every detail of the feature. So an estimate is never going to be able to be exact because we can't estimate on all those little unknowns, but we can give a general estimate, and by keeping the estimates in points, we can it allows us to be more vague and not have to worry about the minute details that are factors in the estimates. We can give more generalized estimates, and this is fine because, as we've recognized, the points of doing estimating is to guide us in planning, and that means that putting really fine granularity into the estimates, it's a waste of effort. So points remind us of this fact. And with this burden lifted of not needing to make these exact estimates, because we can't, because we're using points, that means the developers and people doing the estimating are going to be able to make much speedier decisions when they're estimating, and it's going to allow them to be able to spend more time being productive instead of wasting time worrying about how accurate their estimates are. So another reason points are really useful is that different projects have different factors that influence their velocity. And a good example of this is operating inside a large enterprise environment versus operating in a smaller organization. In enterprise environments, there's often a lot of process overheads. A good example of this that we experienced recently was working with a very large Australian company, and they had a process in place where if you wanted to request a change to their firewall, you would need to put the request in, and this is a firewall change that you'd expect to happen in a number of hours if you're working closely with a small organization. But in this large organization, they'd outsource their IT to another company, another supplier, and you'd put in your request and you'd have to wait for 2 weeks before you could get that request actioned. And when that can have a really big effect. Those sort of things can have a really big effect on your productivity, because you'll put in a request and then you'll have to stop work on a particular thing until you get that request filled. And that really influences the speed of development. And another example that would affect have a different effect on your project is different projects have different product owners. And a product owner who is really getting involved in the project can have a huge impact on the productivity of the team. If they're giving really clear clarifications and communicating the requirements really well to the programmer and doing it at the time when the programmer needs it, then it's going to have a huge influence on how well the programmer is delivering the software that matches their requirements. And these factors are outside the control of the team. They're unknown to the team often at the start of the project. And so using the points allows the team to estimate with confidence without having to worry about these factors, because we can see how features stack up comparatively, and the team's not going to be held to quotes that are a number of hours. We've estimated things in points. We know certain features are larger than others because of the size of the points we've assigned, but we don't necessarily know exactly how much effort those features are going to take to deliver, because we don't know some of those external factors. So recognizing this, it means we can't use velocity to compare two different project teams together. The only thing that we can really use a project team's velocity to compare to is the same project team's velocity in the past. So by having estimates in points rather than hours, we can create a velocity number that's going to be really useful for prediction, but it's also going to be less likely to be misused or abused for purposes that it's not suited for, like comparing teams' performance. This is a confusing point, but it's worth raising. Velocity does not necessarily equal productivity. Sometimes there are factors in a project that are going to influence velocity, but they don't actually influence the productivity of the team. And a simple example is the attitude of the product owner around the rejection of stories. So imagine we have a project and the product owner is very casual in the way they accept their story, all the feature stories. Even if the feature stories don't match up exactly what the project owner wants, the owner says, I can just raise more stories to get the required tweaks done. So that's what they do. They accept all the stories that are close enough and raise new stories, and those new stories get points assigned to them. And then the project team actions those stories. By the end of the project, they deliver the project and everyone's happy. Now imagine we go back in time and instead the project owner takes a different approach to accepting stories. Every time a story doesn't match their requirements exactly, they reject them and ask them to be reworked. And so this time the team, and that's fine, that's what you can do. But this time the team reworks the stories and delivers the features and everyone's happy. At the end of each scenario, the features are exactly the same. Everyone's done the same amount of work and everyone's happy, but the number of points is different because in one scenario, we raised a lot of new stories with points. And so this example shows that velocity, it doesn't equal productivity. And if we had estimated things in hours, it could mean that people would get very confused about what that velocity number actually means. If you said the project team delivered 400 hours of stories versus 600 hours of stories, you might think one project was a lot more productive than the other project, but in fact they delivered exactly the same amount of effort, but the numbers would lie. So by having the points, the estimates in points, it allows us to avoid doing that sort of comparison and use those numbers in ways that just don't really match reality.
The key thing on this one, the key thing on this one is that people, when you're doing a project like this, it's more important to be consistent than it is to be right. So being consistent in your points in the way that you deal with points. So you allocate 4 points to a story, it stays 4 points, and that story gets reworked until it's complete. That's one method, or the other method is allocate 4 points to the story, accept most of it, start a new story and allocate more points to it, and go forth. But that's either one's fine. Just make sure that you choose one and stick to it, because otherwise you start getting really skewy results as you're moving forward.
That's a very good point. All right, so another reason we use points is that if we estimate in hours of effort, it can be misleading to people who are not very well versed in software development. So during software development, there is a lot of effort that goes into not writing code, but doing all those other supporting tasks that are not very necessarily visible to a project owner. Tasks like coordinating a team, interacting with the product owner to get illicit requirements and clarify things, performing code reviews, setting up supporting services. There are a heap of different things that happen during the software development process that are not necessarily developing the actual feature. So if a software developer completed 4 features in a day and we'd estimated each one of those was about an hour each, an outsider who is not understanding of that software process might think, and they'd be thinking incorrectly, that the developer has only done 4 hours of work during the day and they've been somehow wasting all this other time. But if we estimate in points, once again, that abstractness helps us to avoid incorrect conclusions. People tend to, if they see hour-long estimates, they say, I recognize this concept, I know what it means, I'm going to use it how I think it works. But really, even though it's a familiar concept, they'd be abusing it. So the points allows us to make that abstraction and avoid incorrect thoughts about those estimates. One thing that we've learned over the years is that estimates are notoriously difficult to get right. Something as simple as optimism and pessimism can have a huge effect on the amount of effort that you predict something's going to take. It's also easy to forget to add appropriate overhead for surrounding tasks like code reviews and requirement analysis and lots of other little things that go into the software development process but aren't necessarily part of developing the feature. So there are many reasons why estimates can be wrong, but thankfully a lot of these factors that apply to estimates to make them wrong apply in a consistent manner across all estimates, and that consistency can be used to our advantage, because this consistency allows our velocity calculation to account for the missing overhead, because the velocity itself has that missing overhead. Using points instead of units like hours helps us with our mental gymnastics in predicting project outcomes. So we don't have to say, well, nonsense statements like, oh, we're able to fit in 20 hours of features over the next 40 hours of work time. All right, so that brings us to the end of the discussion. Estimates are a great tool for prediction, but they're not really a great tool to commit to. We're not going to, whenever we do an estimate, we don't want to commit to, we're not making a commitment. We have to recognize what the estimates are useful for. So using points for our estimating is a great tool because it's going to help us to recognize the futility of estimating things down to the minute. That saves us time when we're estimating. It allows the developers to estimate with more confidence that their estimates that they give are not going to be used to beat them over the head later on. And it helps us to avoid misunderstandings of what those estimates represent. It allows us to avoid trying to compare the performance of different teams across different projects. And it helps us to make our estimates easily comparable, and it helps us to plan our projects. At Reinteractive, we find points to be a really helpful tool for managing our projects, and we use it for all of our projects. And whether you're a software developer or a product owner, I want you to consider using points to help you plan and communicate better in your next project. And thank you very much.
I just wanted to say one thing. Points as a topic can be really quite complex, but if you get into too much complexity on it, and really like what James said, it's really important just to be consistent. It doesn't matter if you are wrong, as long as you're consistent. You know, if you pick an arbitrary way to pick your points and then stick with that, you're going to be a lot better off than you are chopping and changing. But anyway, James, thank you very much for that.
Well, we haven't decided what our next webinar topic is going to be, so Chloe's going to keep everybody posted via email. But also, you're very free to get in touch with us and use that email address, inquiries@reinteractive.net.
But yeah, thank you very much, everyone.
Excellent. Have a great weekend, everyone.